So I made this new study routine for studying Japanese for myself, and I've been using it for about a month now, and it's been going pretty good. So I wanted to do a bit of a video where I run through just the different things that I use and what I'm actually doing to study Japanese at the moment. So my Japanese is about an N4 level, so I'm definitely no expert when it does come to Japanese. In saying that, I have had some really good progress with this new study routine that I came up with, so hopefully there'll be some information in this video that will be useful to yourself if you are also learning Japanese. Now, I'm actually just sort of going through a little bit here on my computer at the same time, so just bear with me while I go through this. Now, the main reason why I wanted to come up with a study routine for myself when it comes to studying Japanese is because I really needed to come up with my own routine. Now, I had watched a lot of videos in the past on how to study Japanese or how to study languages and how to study Japanese in the best way possible. Watching these videos caused me to look into so many different methods for studying Japanese that I found myself really spread thin. And with each new resource that I attempted to use for studying Japanese, I just found myself always starting back at the beginning again. And because of this, I found that I just wasn't really making any progress, which just completely killed any motivation I had at the time. Now, I did also want to quickly mention that I am a firm believer that there is no one right or wrong way to learn a language. Everyone is completely different and we all learn better in different ways. And we also all have completely different goals. So, what I want to achieve in Japanese might be completely different from what you want to achieve in Japanese. I don't know. For me personally, I just want to be able to read and speak Japanese fluently. Now, although I do think that it is important to be able to write in Japanese, it definitely is not one of my main goals. I would prefer to focus on using Japanese in a similar way that I use English, and which, if I'm honest, for me, day to day involves very little writing at all. So I just feel like focusing on writing in Japanese just isn't that important for me personally. So on top of these goals, for me personally, I also felt that I needed to have a laid out plan that I can follow day by day, week by week, month by month. Because if I don't have something that is laid out in a way that I can just follow it, I find it very difficult for me personally to be able to prepare what I'm going to be studying on any given day. So what works for me may not necessarily be what works for you, but personally I find having just a structured plan that I can follow every single day just very, very useful. So that all said, my routine has some very simple steps. And I also like to limit the resources that I use for studying Japanese just because of some of those issues that I've had in the past. Now, I will also mention that one of the resources that I use for studying Japanese is not free. It does have a subscription. Although in saying that, you can use it for free, it's just somewhat limited in what you can actually do with the free version of it. However, I think that if you're very serious about learning Japanese, it's well worth the investment to get something that is to pay for something that is such a good resource. So yeah, let's get into it. Now, if you are an absolute beginner when it comes to learning Japanese, one of the first things that I recommend that you do is just purely focus on hiragana and katakana. When I first learned Japanese, that was what I did. There was an app that I used many years ago to actually learn hiragana and katakana, and I have not really forgotten them since. It was just a simple app that was just strictly for kana. I believe it was called Tengugo Kana, but that app is unfortunately no longer available anymore. I did go through and test out a few different apps to see if I could find something similar to that one because I did find it so useful. And my only recommendation is that you just don't use an overly complicated app or one that's overly animated or anything like that, or one that actually teaches you words. Just focus on hiragana and katakana. So I did find one app that was similar to this one, and it was called Write Japanese. And I'll just put on the screen here what the app actually looks like in the App Store so you can easily find it. Out of all of the kana apps that I downloaded and tested out to make this video, this was by far the best one because it just focused on hiragana and katakana and also provided ways for you to practice how to write these kana as well as audio for actually listening to how they're pronounced. It's just a very useful looking app. It looks obviously a lot more updated than one I used to use, and it is the most close sort of purely kana focused apps that I was able to find that works in this way. It does have ads, but they're pretty minimal, so I wouldn't really worry about that too much at all. And yeah, if you're just starting out, I would highly recommend that you just stick with that for the next week or two until you've sort of mastered kana. Now, the reason that I would recommend that you do this until you've mastered kana is because that way you can limit the overall amount of English you actually need to use while studying Japanese. I just find that it's much more satisfying being able to read hiragana and katakana, even if you can't understand the words. It allows you to know what the word actually is, to be able to look it up in English without having to sort of rely on English to actually be able to read it. And it really just sort of helps feel like you're progressing in Japanese. After kana, what I did use originally was a textbook called Minna no Nihongo 1. I actually have Minna no Nihongo 1 and 2, but to be honest, I stopped using Minna no Nihongo 1 because I just found the textbook learning to be quite boring. I think that it's something that I might go back to sometime in the future, but as of right now, I just don't find there to be any point. Textbook Japanese is very much like textbook English, wherein it's not the Japanese that you will find yourself using every day or like in day-to-day spoken Japanese. So I don't think that it's something that I can necessarily recommend. Personally, I would recommend that once you've mastered hiragana and katakana, just jump straight into the way I'm studying Japanese now. Although it will be difficult, the progress will be quite quick, I would imagine. So if I was to start over, this is how I would start learning Japanese from scratch, doing it the way I am right now. So the first step is to get Enki. Obviously, Enki is just such an amazing resource. It's completely free, and yeah, there's just not really too much to say about it. It's just an amazing app, and if you're not using it to study Japanese or any language for that matter, I don't know what you would be using, because honestly, I can't think of an app that is just better to use, really. But yeah, so jumping into Enki, one thing I would recommend that you do if you haven't started using Enki yet, or you're planning on learning a language and you haven't started just yet, and you know, Enki is something that you just haven't downloaded for whatever reason, definitely get it. And I would also recommend that you check out this video. I am going to leave it in the description below. This video is from Jozu Jules. It's a video purely just on setting up Enki. I would recommend that you check out at least the section in the video where it goes over the useful settings within Enki to change, because they are very useful, and they're the settings I have actually personally used on my Enki as well. Now with Enki, I do use the Moaway Tango N4 and N5 decks. I have completed the N5 deck, and I've almost completed the N4 deck, which I'm just a little bit behind on my reviews on, but yeah, they're just where I started with Enki about a year ago now, I think. And I learned quite a lot just going through those. There is actually a better one to use now, which is called Kaishi 1.5K deck. So you could probably check that one out instead. I believe it's a shorter deck, and it's meant to be better than the other two. So the links for all of these will actually be on a website, the Moaway website, which I'll leave in my description as well. So definitely check that out if you want to get a good Enki deck to start. Now, I go through my Enki decks daily. It's just one of those things that I can just sort of pull up and go through every single day. It doesn't take too much time, and it's definitely well worth it because you will memorize quite a bit going through them. Now, one thing I do also like to do when I'm using Enki is every time a new card comes up, I actually add it into my Notion. So I have a Notion page that's set up purely for my Enki cards that I do go through, and the reason that I do this, actually, I'll bring it up. So this is my Notion page for my N4 Enki deck. Now, every time a new card comes up, I go ahead and I just add that card in here. And the reason for this is so as I can have the Japanese as well as the English translation, and just a little bit of a description on each kanji that I don't know is hidden in a comment on that kanji. Now, a lot of these kanji I do actually know. I haven't been through here to remove the ones that I know yet. And basically it's to have something like this on here. So for instance, this one, we've got sensei no shitsumon ni kotaemasu. So basically this is just saying, you know, I answered the teacher's question. Now the plan for this Notion page is so as I can go through and I can mark all of the kanji that I'm not confident with 100% just yet. I do plan to sort of go through here section by section and actually handwrite the kanji that I'm really having difficulty with. And as I come to know them, I'll remove the comments so they're just completely gone. And this is just going to be a way that I can practice sort of handwriting kanji, which is kind of not on my high priority list at the moment, but more so as a way to try to really familiarize myself with new kanji, which is sort of one of my higher priorities. Although I have found that just by using Enki and going through it day by day, that these kanji are getting easier and easier to memorize. So for a lot of these, I won't even need to write them out, but there are some that I do find to be a little bit trickier than others, and that's kind of the whole purpose for recording them in here. So just one tip when it does come to using Enki in this way is that don't focus too much on the actual kanji itself. So what I mean by that is if you look at an Enki card and you read it, you're not too sure how to actually read the kanji that's on there, and then you flip the card or you click next and you see the translation and it turns out you actually knew that word and you understand that whole sentence. Still mark that as good because you still understand it. That's fine. Don't use Enki purely just to try and, you know, really memorize kanji because it's just going to take forever to go through it that way. So on the other hand, if you do look at it and you're not 100% on what the actual reading is and you flip it and you still don't know, then you obviously click to have it repeat. So you click bad and it'll come up more often. Now, every now and then, if there's a kanji that I still don't know and I can see that the next repeat date on it is coming up and it's going to be, you know, 3 months into the future, I might still click bad on it just to get it to repeat more frequently again, just to really try and get to see it more often. That way I'm not going to wait another 3 months before I see it again. Although chances are you'll see it come up in another card anyway, so it's just another way to help sort of review it a little bit more frequently. Now, for the main resource that I use when it actually comes to studying Japanese, I use a website and app called LingQ. Now, as I mentioned at the start, this is not a completely free app or website. It does have a free version, just very limited. LingQ is such a great resource because it has a virtually endless amount of content for you to consume. And that's pretty much the main reason why I really enjoy it so much. The other reason is because unlike with other things when learning Japanese, I feel like with LingQ, the more that I use it, the more I feel like I'm learning Japanese that people actually use rather than textbook Japanese that isn't really used in daily conversation. Now, the other great thing about LingQ is that not only can you read a large amount of content in Japanese, but you can also listen to it as well, which is really good. So it basically covers everything. It covers grammar, vocabulary, reading, and listening. It's just pretty much everything that I want when it comes to learning Japanese. It covers all of it, which I just think is amazing. Now, the very first course that I actually used with LingQ actually does a really good way of explaining how I actually go about using LingQ to learn Japanese. So there's a course on there called LingQ 101, and I remember reading that for the first time, didn't really understand it too much, and so just kept learning the vocabulary behind it. Now I can read through that and actually understand everything that's in it. And I can recognize basically like 90% of the kanji that's in there as well, which I just think is amazing. So yeah, the first time I came to be able to fully read and understand that whole course was pretty cool. And that's just another one of the reasons why I think that this has just been such a useful and helpful resource for me personally. So this here is the LingQ website. This is what it looks like. And this is the course that I was referring to before. So this is the LingQ 101 course. As you can see, it says getting started. Great place to start in my opinion. It just takes you through a lot of basic sort of vocab and grammar as well. The grammar in this one is kind of more sort of textbook style grammar, whereas some of the other courses are less textbook. They're more like everyday Japanese, which is really good, but this one was definitely a really good place to start. So I'll get into the LingQ side of things and how the actual website works in just a moment. I do want to just quickly run you through my week-to-week routine that I actually use with LingQ. Now, this week-to-week routine does not take into account any of the work that I actually do in Enki, because Enki is just one of those sort of side things that I just use every day until it's basically done. So I don't really include that as part of my weekly study routine. This is kind of just the routine that I use for LingQ. And also, I don't know if it's called LingQ or just Link, because the Q is kind of silent. I just call it LingQ, but now that I think about it, it's probably just called Link. Okay, so this is my LingQ or Link study plan that I actually use every single week, and well, have been using every week for the past month. And it's one that I will continue to use because for the past month, I've actually seen a lot of really good improvement, and I'm really happy with the way it's gone so far. Now, the main important things with this weekly sort of study routine is the mid and end of week section. If you do plan on using this study routine or doing something similar, the only things that I try to do is I have my midweek and my end of week as the days that I kind of have the most time, because you'll see in just a moment that they do take the most amount of work to get through the full sort of study plan. Now, day one, Monday is day one for me. I just find it easier to remember, but basically on this day, I listen to last month's lessons. So in LingQ, I create playlists. You can create a playlist for your lessons, and those playlists you can basically just listen to the audio portion of those lessons in the playlists. So I separate them by month. Is what I've started to do. So I've got like this month, last month, and so on and so forth. Basically, that's how it will work. And on the Monday, I listen to last month's lessons. That way I can review everything that I had learned up until that Monday. And I'll do that basically every Monday of that month, which means every Monday of the particular month that I'm in, I'll review all of last month's content, but just by the audio lessons. That way I can just quickly get through it all. And it just sort of keeps it all refreshed in my mind as well. And that same day, I'll also read 1 to 3 lessons per day. I will try to not do more than 3, and you'll kind of see why in just a moment, but we'll get into that. Then I add those lessons to this month's playlist. Now then at night, what I'll do is I will basically go through and I will listen to this month's playlist, just again as a way just to purely review it all by doing so like with the audio only. This way it just really helps me be able to both practice Japanese when it comes to listening and reading, which is kind of the main 2 ways that I want to sort of use Japanese other than obviously speaking. Now Tuesday is pretty much the same as Monday, except in the morning I am just listening to this month's content, because I only listen to last month's content on the Mondays as well as the review days. So the review days are basically the days that do take the longest. They're the mid and end of week days. So as you can see here, they're very similar. Wednesday, I will basically in the morning listen to this month's content. I will read last month's content as well as reread this month's lessons as well. And then I will listen to last month's playlist. So basically throughout the day, I will listen to this month's playlist twice, because I'll do it once in the morning, then once at night. And during the day, I will listen to last month's playlist again, as well as reread both months' content. So it is a lot of content. So if you do more than 3 lessons per day, you'll end up with a lot of lessons that you have to read through on these review days. And I did it this way because I want to really be able to maximize the amount of reading that I'm doing, because it's one of the things that I do struggle with is reading quickly. And that's just one of those things that I'm trying to improve. And that mostly just comes to not knowing all of the kanji yet. But even katakana, like I know katakana, but it definitely takes me a lot longer to read than hiragana. Now, the only difference between the midweek and end of week review days is that on the end of week review day, on the Sunday for me, when I'm going through the lessons, like just this week's lessons, I'll actually go through and find the words that I'm struggling with the most for that week, and I will add them into a separate Enki deck for sort of reviewing that way. Now, there's a very good reason as to why I prefer to review these words and these kanji in Enki versus LingQ. Now, the reason that I prefer to do it this way is because in Enki, I can just review them pretty freely, whereas in LingQ, it works a little bit differently. Now, one thing I did actually forget to mention is that when using LingQ, I do also document sort of my progress in this notebook here. So as you can see, I've got like the course that I studied on a particular day, the lessons that I did, and whether or not I added it to a playlist. And the reason I do this is to keep track of just which lessons I actually studied during a given month. So that's actually useful for when going back over to reread them on the review days. So basically, LingQ does have a very similar sort of spaced repetition sort of learning system that Enki has. The only difference is that with the words as you're going through them, it will, like, the more you get them correct, it will kind of move those words from, you know, not being known to gradually being more and more known. And once they're fully known, it just completely removes them from that sort of review list. Actually, I'll show you here because it's much easier to see when you're actually looking at it. This will explain it much better than I probably could in words. So if we have a look, we'll have a look at the LingQ 101 sort of lesson. And let's see, which one do we want to look at? Let's go with this one. So this one is sort of just about picking the right kind of lessons for yourself. So here we have 興味のある内容で学習しましょう. Now, for me personally, 内容 is one of those kanji or words that I struggle with. And that's why I've left it as a word that I don't fully know. The reason why I like having it this way in LingQ is because if you don't fully know it, it leaves the furigana, which is like these hiragana writings above the actual kanji, so you can still read it and you don't have to sort of stop and click on it every time you want to try and read that word. Whereas the ones that don't have that above it are ones that I actually know, so I don't actually need the furigana there to be able to understand that sentence. So if I reviewed these words all just in Link, then essentially once I get to a point where I'm answering them just based off of context, not necessarily because I actually know what that word is on its own, it may remove this furigana, and then I have to go through the process of clicking on it to sort of, you know, add it back into a word that I don't know. Whereas if I review it in Enki, I don't really have to worry about this happening. So that word's always going to be there with the furigana and me being able to read it. And if I get to a point where I understand it and I don't need that furigana, I can just manually click on it and add it to my known words list. Now, this actually brings me to another really important reason as to why I like Link as much as I do. So the reason is this page right here. So on this page, as you can see, it has a really good way of keeping track of all of your progress when it comes to actually using LingQ. So for instance, in here, I can check my all time record. It'll show me everything I've done, you know, of all time essentially. Same with here. You can basically go of all time and it will show you, you know, the amount of links you've created, the amount of words you've read, hours you've listened to, and it's just a really good way of keeping track of all of the words that you know, as well as, you know, how much reading and everything you've been doing. The progress tracker is definitely one of the main reasons that I like LingQ as much as it is, other than the fact that it's just got such a vast amount of content on there. It's just insane. But this progress tracker is really, really useful because it feels good to know sort of how much progress you're making in a language and to see, you know, sort of week by week, these numbers going up, you know, like it's just really useful to have that kind of progress there. I think it's definitely a really good way to help sort of build your motivation when it comes to learning Japanese, especially. Well, any language probably, but for me, I'm learning Japanese, obviously. So for me, it's just a really, really good way to really keep that motivation and keep pushing myself forwards when it comes to learning. And so that's kind of the reason why I would prefer to sort of add the words to Enki rather than doing it inside of LingQ. So that way, when I know the word for a kanji or something like that, instead of updating and sort of removing the furigana above a word that I know, I can just come in here when I know the word and I can just sort of manually just add it to my known word list, because I know what saisho is. I can read that kanji now. I know it. I've read it a lot of times. Now I can just freely update it when I want to. And that's kind of why I don't so much like the space repetition system within within Link, because it's just a little bit more inconvenient when it comes to progressively reading, because I don't want to have to sort of keep going back and sort of clicking on words I'm not too sure what they are. I'd rather just have the furigana there to be able to read it. Whereas with the words I do know, I like when the furigana is not there, because I like knowing that I don't have to rely on that. Now, I will also just quickly say that LingQ is by no means perfect. There is quite a bit of issues with the furigana in particular, where sometimes they're just wrong. They'll have like different readings for the kanji above them instead of the ones that's actually meant to be there for that sentence. The good thing is though, they all have audio as well, and the audio for the lessons are always correct, so you never really have to worry about it too much. As long as you're both doing listening and reading practice, you'll be fine. It's probably my main issue when it comes to using Link, but it's pretty rare that it comes up. It's not too big of a deal at all by any means, but it's just something to be aware of, especially if you're a beginner, because obviously making a mistake like that when it comes to Japanese will completely change the word. So it's just something to be aware of, that's all. One of the main reasons why I mentioned that Link has a virtually endless amount of content is because it actually has the ability for you to be able to import lessons into it. Now, this isn't something that I've tried too much yet. I actually recently just tested it just to see how it works by basically using Notion AI to write a short story, and then I used Notion to also translate that story into Japanese, because I like the Notion AI translation. It does a very good job of it. And then I basically imported that Japanese translation into Link to create a lesson from it. And it actually does a really good job of it. So here we have my Notion where I just created a blank page just to create a random Notion AI story. And then I converted that story into Japanese. And then basically over here, I went to import lessons, and there was just a button there to import it, as you can see here. And this is this text here basically converted into an actual LingQ lesson. So for instance here, many years, so this is just a word I haven't seen in LingQ yet, although I do know it. So because I know it, you can basically just add it and then just add it straight into your known words list, because you already know what it is. So this is just a really good thing, because it just means that all of the content is just endless, really. Like, you can pretty much create a lesson out of absolutely anything in Link and use that to learn such a vast amount of vocabulary. It's just pretty crazy, the amount of things that you can actually do. And it's really, compared to a lot of language apps, it's actually really well priced. I was actually surprised. The only thing I would like to see from it is like a lifetime subscription would be great. But in saying that, with using Link for a few years doing this kind of study routine, I really don't see me needing it all, for a lifetime, but it'd still be really great to have, because there are so many really useful and interesting lessons on Link. So just to sort of show you a little bit as to the different amount of content that's actually on here, like if we have a look, there's there's some lessons here that are created by the creators of Link, and if you scroll down, you'll see sort of like trending ones, and they even have there's a section for news feeds, so you can actually read news reports in Link and translate them and learn sort of that context of Japanese. There's just so much different variety of content, and you can even, I think there's even a section now for YouTube, like certain YouTube videos you can see through Link and learn the vocabulary in those lessons in the LingQ structure. So yeah, there's just such a huge amount of content in here. The only thing that's something I do for sort of moving these lessons into Enki is I do use Language Reactor to do that. I don't really remember how to set up Language Reactor, but there's a lot of YouTube videos on how to do that. I followed one. I don't really remember which one it was that I used to do it, but there is a ton of them. So just look around. It's very, very easy. But if you don't really want to move these words from Link to Enki, you don't have to. You can just use the space repetition system in Link. I don't want to because, again, I just don't want those words to move from my not known list to my known list before I feel like I'm ready for it. So yeah, that's basically how I've been studying Japanese for the past month and how I intend to keep studying Japanese from this point on. And the reason for that is just because it's just very well structured and it covers all of the goals that I want when it comes to learning Japanese. So as you can see, writing for me when it comes to learning Japanese is pretty minimal, and that's just because it isn't one of my main goals. So it is something that I do definitely want to do a little bit more of, just not right now, that's all. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video or found any of the information to be somewhat useful, a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. And if you have any study tips of your own, please leave them in the comments below. See you in the next one. Bye for now.